Hello and welcome to the Yak, the wide receiver analysis podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Ebertson at BChad50. Talk about week 15 and obviously getting down into crunch time. So we're looking a lot at the players that are playing in meaningful games. There's not a lot of them left, but somehow most teams in the NFL not eliminated yet, which just tells you the state of a few of these divisions in particular. Looking at you, NFC East and AFC South, there's no reason why these teams should still be in. But either way, that just gives us more meaningful games, which gives us more legitimate options. So starting off here, your top play, Elite played Larry Fitzgerald for the Arizona Cardinals. Have been an incredible passing attack this year. Carson Palmer's been efficient. Larry Fitzgerald has had one of the higher floors of any player really at all at any price point. And you look at his price, still not indicative of a guy who's, an elite wide receiver. 7,200 on FanDuel, 73 on DraftKings. You get some savings from the elite guys, and not a lot of the elite guys that are in great spots for cash games. So you can get yourself a nice high floor and the upside with a guy like Fitzgerald this week.
Exactly. That you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the big guys, the guys that almost always populate the elite section of this, have either tough matchups or I'm looking at you, Julio Jones. I don't trust their quarterback. I mean, Matt Ryan's played like garbage this year. Sure, Julio's got a high ceiling, but Carson Palmer's playing like a man possessed this year. It's been awesome, and he provides substantial savings from a guy like Julio Jones. And on a week where I really feel like paying up at running back, maybe paying up at quarterback for a dual threat like Cam Newton or Russell Wilson, or just a hot quarterback like Larry Fitzgerald's teammate Carson Palmer, you got to pay down somewhere, and I don't feel like you're sacrificing a lot of production with Fitzgerald. He has been remarkably consistent this year. He's caught 5 passes or more in 12 of 13 games, and he's totaled at least 60 yards in 9 contests as well. So you're starting off with, on DraftKings, where you get the full point per reception, you're starting off with a floor of 11 fantasy points. So, I mean, that's tough to overlook. And obviously I wouldn't feature him in the elite plays if I thought he was in great danger for hitting his floor. His ceiling is substantially higher against a team that ranks 26th according to Football Outsiders defending number ones. They've given up a ton of touchdowns. They've given up a ton of yardage through the air. So there's a lot of avenues for Fitz to score. And the spread's a lot smaller than I think people are going to be expecting if they haven't looked at lines yet. But remember, this is a Cardinals team that lost last time they were in Pennsylvania earlier this year playing the Steelers. I do think it's a close-ish contest, which means that they're going to be airing it out through the entirety of the game, and that's really good news for Fitz, who, I mean, he is the unquestioned number one and a very talented receiving core in Arizona. But, I mean, Michael Floyd has big games here and there. John Brown has big games here and there, but Fitz is always the constant every week.
Yeah, Fitz is the glue that gives those guys, takes the attention away from those guys so they can make the big plays down the field, things like that. So next up, if you don't know this guy's been on fire recently, then you either aren't making money or you aren't paying attention, or maybe both. Doug Baldwin coming off yet another 3-touchdown game. We see the Seahawks offense now missing Marshawn Lynch, now missing Thomas Rawls to replace Lynch, now missing Jimmy Graham, and then, of course, Thomas Rawls went down. Dwan Harris came in, looked terrible. Everyone flocked to the waiver wire to get him. Then we see Bryce Brown picked up for the 3rd time this year by them. And then everyone flocks to the waiver wire to pick him up. And then all of a sudden, we hear Dwan Harris is cut. Bryce Brown is not only being picked up, but they're also bringing back Christian Michael for about the 17th time again. So once again, it's a mess in the backfield. But there is one constant in this offense, and it's Russell Wilson. And Cam Newton's getting a whole lot of love right now, but Russell Wilson has been the best quarterback in football over the past month.
Yeah, and he's doing it with his arm. I mean, which is obviously great news for Doug Baldwin, since Doug Baldwin is his number one receiver. He went from playing at a very pedestrian level to playing like a number one, not just like any number one, like a stud number one. I mean, he's finding the end zone with remarkable regularity of late. Since the Week 9 bye, he scored 9 touchdowns. He's totaled 515 yards receiving on 30 receptions. The averages, his per-game averages since the Week 9 bye are 6 receptions for 103 yards and 1.8 touchdowns per game. So he's averaging almost 2 touchdowns, and he's getting you the 100-yard bonus on DraftKings. And yet DraftKings is snoozing. I mean, at some point they got to quit hitting the snooze button on their alarm clock because he's $5,800 right now. If you're not starting your cash games by locking in Doug Baldwin, I don't know what you're doing because that price almost forces you to use him. FanDuel stiffened up their pricing. He's at 74, but I still like him a lot with backfield and disarray, as you mentioned. The Seahawks, 14.5-point favorites, but I'm not scared away in even cash games by that big spread because they're going to have to do something to get to that big lead. I suspect that's going to be Russell Wilson torching that Browns secondary. And even when they have that lead, if they're not running the ball successfully, they're going to have to continue to air it out to keep that big lead. Granted, the defense isn't exactly going to give up many points to the Browns either, but Doug Baldwin, remarkably consistent of late. He's been playing at an exceptionally high level, and that price point is just too good to ignore it on DraftKings.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another one of those Todd Gurley situations, and we're about to get to another one here in a minute with Jeremy Maclin, who early in the season got off to a really hot start, was underpriced then, kind of struggled a little bit as the Chiefs struggled, but then kind of come back into being that key option in the passing attack for them. And still another guy that remains underpriced, not quite as significantly as Doug Baldwin. He's not producing at quite that level, but still at $5,500, you know he's going to be a guy that a lot of people are going to flock to. And Chiefs go from 1-5 to all of a sudden not out of the race to win the division yet. So all of a sudden the Chiefs are a threat, and a lot of it has to do with the fact they can actually throw the ball to a wide receiver now. Yeah,
and Alex Smith is stepping up and utilizing his receiver. I mean, he's not throwing a ton of passes, but over the last 3 weeks, he's targeted Jeremy Maclin with exactly 40% of his passes. So Maclin is cannibalizing all of the targets in that offense. I mean, good luck to guys like Travis Kelce and Albert Wilson with Maclin just gobbling up all of those targets. And he's making the most of those targets. He's hauled in 24 receptions on 30 targets, 323 yards receiving with 3 touchdowns. So he's finding the end zone. He's getting yardage. He's piling up receptions. And even though it's been a bit of an up and down season for Maclin, did have that stretch early on. They went away from him, and somebody smacked Alex Smith in the back of the head and said, "What are you doing, man? Your number one receiver played at a high level. Get the football back to him." And he's been playing at a very high level again. Love the DraftKings price. And even on FanDuel, he feels a little bit underpriced at just $6,700. So pretty easy guy to slot in your cash games. And this week, couldn't ask for a better matchup. Literally, the Baltimore Ravens are giving up the most DraftKings and FanDuel points per game to wide receivers this year. So really like Maclin. I mean, that kind of volume against that kind of defense not only sets your floor very high, but Maclin's ceiling's through the roof.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this next guy, not a household name as far as wide receivers go, but was a household name in college. I mean, his days at Kansas State, you look at 22 touchdowns in his last 2 years at Kansas State, almost 3,000 yards. So this is a guy who was the number one receiver for, I won't say a prolific offense, but a good offense in college in a pass-heavy attack. Kind of stepped into this game, into this role with the Seahawks where they were run first, pass when you need to type of offense. Now they've kind of turned the corner and realized we need to throw the ball down the field to win games. And Tyler Lockett has certainly responded in a big way. So at his price tag, especially once again the DraftKings price, Tyler Lockett has a decent floor and some big-time upside. He's had some really big games recently.
Yeah, 4,200 on DraftKings, 6,000 on FanDuel. Really like that price point there as well. And Lockett leaned on heavily in the special teams department early in the season. Returned a punt for a touchdown, returned a kickoff for a touchdown earlier this season. But finally really getting his chance to shine in the passing attack. Jimmy Graham's absence, I think, has kind of been a motivating factor for Seattle to really get the receivers involved. And Lockett's a guy who's looked exceptionally good. The last 2 weeks, targeted 14 times. He's only caught 13 of those 14 balls. No big deal. Nearly 100% reception rate on the targets, but not just getting short targets either. I mean, 194 yards receiving, pair of touchdowns, both of those coming in his last game, and went over 100 yards for the first time in a single game last week. So has a really good matchup with the Browns. As I noted with Doug Baldwin, that secondary has been terrible. They're giving up a ton of points to receivers, and that was before Joe Hayden went on IR. So that secondary is even more banged up. And again, hate to beat a dead horse, but that backfield looks like garbage right now, which means more pressure put on the passing game, which means Russell Wilson using his receivers like Lockett and Baldwin to race out to that big lead that the Seahawks defense is going to hold for them. But they got to get to that lead somehow, and I expect that to be through the game. And if you're looking for a swerve off of the more popular Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett's the guy for me in that passing attack. He might gain some steam as the weekend rolls around. I do think you're going to start to see some hype for him as people settle in and look at that price point. But I wouldn't even be against a trio for a stack of Wilson, Baldwin, and Lockett. Again, it really comes down to not having any faith in the backs in that backfield and really loving Russell Wilson and his receivers are doing of late.
Yeah, and there's a reason why guys like Bryce Brown, Christian Michael, all these guys have been on and off this Seahawks roster. They didn't want them to be there, or they would have still been there. They're bringing it back because those are their best options at this point. So, we see the situation with running backs who are not on rosters is pretty dire straits, as we see Steven Jackson getting calls from the Patriots as well today. So, yeah, it's take what you can get out there on the, I guess, free agent market for these guys. So definitely the passing attack. And, I mean, Russell Wilson, as efficient as they come right now.
Yeah, rumor has it Christian Okoye is looking longingly at his phone, hoping that it rings here pretty soon. So,
yeah, I saw a great tweet earlier, too, that said if your phone rings from a 206 area code, it's probably the Seahawks calling to ask if you want to be the starting running back for Sunday because they don't want anyone else.
Yeah.
But either way, moving on here to Odell Beckham Jr. and the GPP plays. It's crazy that he's down to the GPP plays, but when you take the cornerback who's been the best cornerback in football, obviously subjective, everyone's got their opinions, their biases, whatever. I'm not biased here. I just think he's been the best. Odell Beckham Jr. also, I think, has been the best receiver. So, you got the clash of titans here, the big receiver, big unbeatable receiver against a big unbeatable corner. Something's got to give here, and that's what kind of pushes Odell Beckham down into the GPP range. But you certainly still want some exposure to a guy who's on a team that, based on their record, most years will kind of be out of it. But right now, with the state of the NFC East, all of a sudden, Odell Beckham makes a couple plays each game, and this team just gets closer and closer to having a chance of winning that division and making the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, if OBJ was getting the Doug Baldwin DraftKings pricing treatment, maybe I could justify just sticking him in GPPs and not caring about matchups. But he's the most expensive receiver on both sides, and when factoring in that I should keep him from producing at superhuman levels, hold OBJ to just 80 yards and a touchdown. I mean, something of that nature, not really going to be quite what you're looking for OBJ's price of 9,100 on FanDuel and 9. He's going to need more than that. But, I mean, he's certainly been putting up more than that of late. He's off to a historic start. And not hyperbole. He's literally had the most productive 2 years to start a career for an NFL receiver, whether you're measuring by yardage, touchdowns. He's just been otherworldly. He's averaging 105 yards receiving per game his career. He's caught 24 touchdown passes in 25 games, and he's been even hotter than that lately. Over his last 6 games, he's averaging 132.67 receiving yards per game, 7.17 receptions per game, and he got 8 touchdown grabs. So, I mean, the guy's just going nuts right now. He's a matchup nightmare. He can do it on the outside, and I think you'll see this happen a little bit over the weekend. I think you'll see OBJ get moved into the slot a little bit, take away that sideline as the extra defender, so to speak, in space and get him the football. We saw that he ran a nice slant route where he ran untouched basically after his reception from against the Dolphins. Don't expect that to be the case against Carolina, but I think that they will get at least a little bit creative. I mean, I don't know what the Atlanta Falcons were doing with Julio Jones. They just left him outside all day. They didn't move him into the slot. I don't think the Giants are that dumb. They do make some head-scratcher decisions, but they seem to be willing to move OBJ around, and I think that's going to help him this week. And that's worth taking a chance on in GPPs, but again, the price point turns me a little bit away from him in cash games. I think you can get some other good plays there, but when it comes to ceiling, there's nobody that's got higher one than OBJ right now.
Yeah, and I saw a stat, something like 21% of his snaps do come in the slot, and like you mentioned with the Matt Ryan thing and the Falcons, is Eli Manning is a quarterback that should be and is trusted a whole hell of a lot more than a guy like Matt Ryan at this point. A couple years ago, people thinking Matt Ryan's getting into that upper tier, and he's proven this year that he does not belong anywhere near that upper tier.
No.
So, moving on to the last guy here. somehow the top receiver, or I guess the best receiver by default, on the only undefeated team in the NFL, Ted Ginn Jr. And as a Buckeye fan, I remember his days at Ohio State, and I remember his days in San Francisco and his early days in Carolina. And the guy has rocks for hands, but he's a track star. The guy is so fast, and you deal with him dropping some big passes, like he dropped one 2 weeks ago that was an easy touchdown. But I mean, 2 catches last week, and he was the highest scoring wide receiver until the Monday night game when Odell went off. But you don't need much. I mean, you don't need this guy to get 10 targets for him to pay off.
No, I don't love the FanDuel price, 6,600. 46 on DraftKings is a lot more palatable. But again, the thing about that $6,600 price point, and it's worth mentioning, is that while I don't like it, I'm sure I'm not alone. There are other gamers that are going to look at that. They're going to see 6,600 and be a little bit dissuaded from using. Again, the fact there's no flex there, also going to drive his ownership rate down a little bit as well. But with Ginn, looking at the numbers, one number that pretty much tells the story for him this year: 37 receptions on 78 targets. He's not efficient. He does drop a lot of balls, but he's a big play machine. He's got 9 receptions of 20-plus yards, and he's caught 8 touchdown passes this year, which, I mean, who'd think that Ted Ginn would be among the league leaders in touchdown receptions any season? But that's where we're at. The Panthers' passing game, when they lost Cal Benjamin, it became Greg Olsen and everybody else, and everybody else at that front of the line, he's second on the team in receptions, targets, receiving yards, and he leads the team in touchdown grabs. He's caught 4 touchdown passes in the last 2 weeks, 2 in each week, and he's gone off for over 180 yards receiving in those 2 contests combined. So, I mean, he's a big play waiting to happen. He's facing a bad secondary in the Giants. Giants are giving up a ton of fantasy points to receivers, and they're giving up a ton of yardage too. 308.4 yards passing per game to quarterbacks. That is by far the worst mark in the NFL. So a lot to like here about Ted Ginn Jr. in terms of upside. Don't have to look very far to see the downside here and why he is just a GPP play. 3 weeks ago against Cowboys on Thanksgiving, put up a bagel. That is Ted Ginn Jr. in a nutshell. It's all or nothing, but in GPPs, it's what you're looking for, and you're getting it at a low ownership rate. And another factor working in his favor, on Wednesday, Jonathan Stewart was announced out for this game, which eliminates their running back, and Greg Olsen, if he plays, got to expect he's going to be less than 100% damage, but not 100% sure what his status is going to be for this weekend. But even if he plays, you got to figure he's going to be a little bit less than 100%. So, again, might get a few more targets. And for a guy who needs all the targets he can get with his stone hands, got to like that. Also got to like the fact that all it takes is one of those extra looks being a streaker down the sideline, pays himself off.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely the big play threat, the home run threat there. So get yourself some cheap exposure to the guy that Cam Newton loves to throw the ball deep to. And they also like to get ahead early and coast at the end. So this could definitely be one of those situations where you see that deep ball early and you sit back and it's all just extra from that point once you get that long touchdown.
Yeah.
So, all right, that'll wrap things up for us here for Week 15. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got lots of other great content here at dailyfantasycafe.com.